The noise was what got me first, not the crash itself. That was just a sickening thump. But the sound of the metal pan skittering across the linoleum floor. It sounded small, pathetic, like a tiny mouse trying to run away from something too big. I lay there on my side, smelling the clean lemon pledge I used to wipe the floor just yesterday. I was 71 years old, and I couldn't stand up long enough to pull a skillet out of the cabinet without ending up on the floor. My hip wasn't broken, thank God. But the shame was worse than the pain. For 40 years, I had stood on my own 2 feet, running the busiest lunch counter in downtown Des Moines. I had hands that knew the difference between a perfect hollandaise and scrambled eggs made in a hurry. My life was defined by standing, by serving, by being sturdy, built like they say, like an old oak cabinet. Now I was just a pile of bones and loose skin, stuck between the stove and the kitchen island. It had been 6 months since the first trip. That one, I blamed the rug. Then it was the steps outside, blamed on bad lighting. We're not spring chickens anymore, I told myself, trying to sound tough. But the truth was, inside this little bungalow, I'd worked double shifts to pay off. The only thing I had to leave to Mark. I was falling apart faster than an old screen door in a storm. It feels like my legs are filled with sand, I mumbled to the Dr. Sullivan, a young man who looked too tired to be a doctor. He kept rubbing my shins, looking at his clipboard. He spoke in words that didn't sound like English. Sarcopenia, frailty, chronic low, vitamin D. It was just the process of aging, he said. Like aging was some kind of slow-motion accident you couldn't stop. I was always a good citizen. I trusted the system. If the doctor said jump, I asked how high. So I followed every instruction Medicare would cover. MRIs, blood tests, nerve studies, all just confirming what I already knew. I was weak. He put me on a carousel of expensive pills to manage the dizziness and the constant low-grade nausea. And then came the weekly physical therapy. You need to rebuild strength, Maggie, the doctor insisted. So Mark drove me 15 miles every Tuesday afternoon to a shiny new facility. $30 every time, copay that hurt my retirement fund. I spent 40 minutes stretching against bands and lifting feather-light weights. When I left, I felt no stronger, just poorer. Mark, I think they're missing something, I confessed to my son one Sunday. He was sitting at the kitchen table running his hands through his thinning hair. Mark was a good boy, bless his heart. But he was always stretched thin, shift manager at the hardware store, worried sick about the mortgage, worried sick about my medical bills. Money doesn't grow on trees, I heard him mumble under his breath more than once when the hospital bill came after my last spill. He always looked stressed, and usually that meant he pushed me toward Bethany. Bethany, my daughter-in-law. She was like a new appliance, sharp, shiny, and efficient. I had loved her like my own daughter, truly, especially when Mark brought her home 10 years ago. She was a registered nurse, so she knew the language the doctor spoke. She took charge immediately, organizing my pills into 7 colored boxes, labeling everything. It felt like a kindness, a relief at first, but Bethany had a way of taking care of me that felt more like taking over. You need protein, Mom, she'd chirped every morning, handing me that thick beige smoothie. The doctor said we need to reverse that muscle loss, and these powders are the best. They're fortified. I hated that smoothie. It had no taste, or rather, it had a taste like chalky desperation. I'm a cook, for goodness sake. I know how to make food taste good. I tried to tell her I'd rather have an omelet and toast. Something solid, something real. But Bethany was relentless. Her eyes would narrow just a fraction, and her voice would drop, suddenly sounding hard and cold, like winter ice. "We have to be strict if you want to stay in this house, Maggie. Otherwise, we'll have to talk about assisted living." That was the bomb she always dropped. Assisted living. That meant losing my home. Losing the house I scrubbed every corner of. The house I could still smell Mark's baby powder in. Losing my freedom. She knew that fear was the tightest knot in my stomach. After that threat, I drank the tasteless concoction. But after I drank it, I felt immediately worse. Sluggish. Heavy. The dizziness would start maybe an hour later, like someone spinning a gyroscope behind my eyeballs. Bethany, meanwhile, kept talking business. Always sharp, always polite, always talking about my estate. She was constantly pushing Mark to sign papers, legal forms that would put his name on the deed. Just for ease of transition. Ease of transition. That meant ease for them to sell it the minute I dropped dead. It was disguised as care. But the greed was a sour taste, worse than the beige smoothie sitting deep in my gut. I watched her closely after a while. I couldn't help it. I had worked too hard, raised Mark alone, scrubbing pots and pans to get him through community college, only to watch my daughter-in-law circle like a vulture around my only asset. It was a betrayal that made my heart ache more than any fall ever could. The falls kept getting scarier, too. Last week, I tried to open the refrigerator, and the whole world just tilted. I hit my head on the edge of the linoleum, hard. Mark rushed me to the emergency room, panicking. We ran up thousands more in deductible costs. "You have to be more careful, Maggie." Bethany lectured me afterward. Her eyes weren't worried. They were annoyed, irritated. "We can't afford this constantly." That was when the real fear began. The kind that whispers you're going crazy in the dark. I started keeping a little mental log, like a cook tracking inventory. Every bad episode. The severe dizziness. The sudden leg collapse. It all happened within an hour or two of consuming one of Bethany's specialized meals, or taking the medication she had organized in that color-coded box. Was it paranoia? Was this what old age felt like? Losing your mind and seeing enemies where there were only helpful hands? It is what it is. I tried to tell myself. Maybe I was just ready for the end. Maybe I was just sinking into dementia. I tried to push the dark thoughts away. I remembered Bethany as the young, charming woman Mark had married. She was so sweet back then. I loved her like my own flesh. But the pattern kept repeating. The better I felt in the morning, the worse I felt after her food. One evening, Mark and Bethany decided to stay late to monitor me after the recent concussion scare. I was supposed to be resting in my bedroom. I had taken the pills Bethany insisted on. They always made me drowsy and cloudy. But I hadn't fallen asleep yet. The door was slightly ajar, letting in a thin line of light from the living room. I heard their voices, hushed, low. I strained my ears, rubbing my temples. Mark sounded completely defeated. All his stress, all his worry about the bills and the mortgage. It was right there in his tired voice. Then came Bethany's voice. It wasn't the sweet, chirping nurse voice. It was cold and clear, cutting through the silence of the old house. It sealed the realization I had been running from, the devastating, terrible truth that this was no accident, and no mere illness. "Don't worry, Mark. She can't keep calling 911 if she can't even stand up. The more fragile she is, the sooner we can move forward with the deed. I told you she won't last the year, if we stick to the schedule." That sentence hit me harder than hitting my head on the linoleum. She won't last the year if we stick to the schedule. The schedule, the pills, the smoothies. It wasn't old age. It was a plan. The shock was a physical thing. It was like someone had thrown a bucket of ice water over my fear, and now the fear turned into something sharp and focused. All the little worries I had, the doubt that maybe I was just crazy seeing things, they all dried up and blew away. I wasn't paranoid. I was being murdered slowly, right here in the house I paid for. Bethany wasn't just my daughter-in-law. She was a predator, and Mark, my own flesh and blood, was letting it happen. I lay perfectly still, listening to them whispering about my death like they were planning a trip to the hardware store. Bethany's voice was tight with anticipation, and Mark just kept sighing, sounding miserable but compliant. That's when the second wave of pain hit, deeper than the first. It wasn't the fear of dying. It was the shame of being betrayed by the one person I thought loved me more than money. I decided right then and there. I wouldn't die on their schedule. If I was going down, I was going down fighting, like a chef defending her kitchen. The very next morning, Bethany brought in the beige smoothie. The smell of that thick, chalky sludge made my stomach turn. "Drink this, Mom. It's vital," she chirped, the nurse voice back on. Her eyes, though, were sharp and assessing. She was checking the damage the schedule had done. I pushed the glass away. "Not today, dear. I feel... the nausea is back. If I drink that, I'll just throw it up." Bethany's face didn't move, but her eyes narrowed, just like they did when I was late paying the copay. "Maggie, we talked about this. We need the protein to reverse the muscle loss. You want to stay in your home, don't you?" That was the threat. But now the threat didn't scare me. It energized me. "I know, dear. But I need to keep the pills down first. I'll try to sip some water." She hesitated, looking at her watch. She clearly had places to be. The thought of losing the house was her lever, but she couldn't force it down my throat. She placed the colored pill box and a water cup on my bedside table, right next to the smoothie. "I'll be back at lunch. Don't skip these, Maggie. They help with the dizziness." I watched her leave. As soon as the car pulled out of the driveway, I stared at the beige drink and the pills. The tiny, expensive little capsules that made my head spin and my legs turn to sand. I picked up the first pill, put it in my mouth, and took a sip of water. I pretended to swallow, but I kept the pill tucked securely under my tongue. It was bitter. I spat it out into a napkin later and folded it tightly. I did the same with the other 2 pills. I needed proof, and I needed to stop the falls. I spent the rest of the day hiding my secret. I avoided the smoothie entirely, pouring a tiny bit down the sink each time I heard a car door, just in case. By evening, I felt different. I still felt weak, tired and scared. But the terrifying dizziness hadn't arrived. The gyroscope wasn't spinning behind my eyeballs. The effect was immediate. The drugs, the sedatives, whatever she was using, they were fast-acting. I wasn't going crazy. The sickness wasn't aging. It was the schedule. But now I had a bigger problem. Bethany managed everything. My real doctor, my pharmacy, my food. Mark was in her pocket. If I stood up and said, "She's poisoning me," they would simply say, "Poor Maggie is delusional. She needs institutional care immediately." And the house would be theirs even faster. I had to be clever. I had to find an ally. Not someone on the inside, like Mark, but someone outside the circle of Bethany's perfect management. My mind went straight to Doris Henderson. Doris lived right across the street in a small, neat green bungalow. She was 75, a retired school librarian, and sharp as a tack. Doris and I had always traded gossip and zucchini bread, but in the last 6 months, she'd been watching me deteriorate, bringing over meals I couldn't eat, and asking worried questions that Bethany always intercepted. She's sharp as a tack, I thought. She missed nothing. I knew Bethany scheduled my physical therapy sessions every Tuesday afternoon. 2 hours of useless stretching and gentle leg lifts that only made me feel poorer. The following Tuesday, I waited until Bethany and Mark were gone, thinking I was resting. My heart was pounding like a drum, worried they would forget something and come back. I got up, leaning heavily on the kitchen counter. My legs still felt heavy, but they didn't wobble the way they used to. I wrapped the tiny package of hidden pills and a small baggie of the smoothie residue in an old linen handkerchief. I crossed the street. Every step was hard work, but I made it to Doris's porch. Doris opened the door, her glasses perched on her nose. She looked at me, really looked at me, and her expression changed instantly from kind curiosity to grim understanding. I must have looked terrible, sweaty, shaky, and terrified. "Maggie, come in, dear. You look like you just wrestled a bear," Doris said, guiding me to her worn velvet armchair. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. I put the handkerchief on her antique coffee table. "Doris, I know this sounds crazy, but they're trying to kill me. Bethany, for the house." Doris didn't flinch. She picked up the folded napkin with the pills and the baggie with the beige powder residue. "Tell me everything, Maggie. Don't leave out a single detail." I poured out the whole story. The falls, the dizziness always after the smoothie, the pills, the talk I overheard, and the overwhelming fear. When I finished, Doris was silent for a long moment, turning the bag of powder over in her hand. Her eyes were sad. "I had a hunch, Maggie. She asked me about tax law back in December. Said she was doing estate planning for you. I told her I didn't hold with rushing things. Doris was methodical. She was a librarian. She organized the crime like it was a Dewey Decimal System. First, we need confirmation. The pills are probably just strong sedatives. But that powder, I think it's meant to look like an aggressive nutritional supplement. But it's covering something else. We need to test it, and we can't use anyone local." Doris had connections from her teaching days, including a former student who now ran a private, non-medical testing lab 3 states away. We packaged the sample, listing it only as a senior nutritional supplement concern, and Doris sent it off that day. Then we talked about the falls. "Maggie, every time you come back from PT, you feel worse, right?" Doris asked. "Just poorer." I sighed. 40 minutes of stretching and bands. It doesn't feel like I'm building anything solid. Doris leaned forward, her voice dropping, full of conviction. "That's the betrayal, Maggie. Bethany knows exactly what kind of exercise actually prevents falls and reverses frailty. And she's having you do the one kind that does nothing." She stood up and walked to a closet, pulling out a printout from a medical website. The real protocol, the one the CDC and NIH recommend for people with sarcopenia, it focuses on functional strength, Maggie, not expensive stretching. It focuses on the core and the big muscles you need to catch yourself when you trip. That place you go, it's worthless, and it keeps you weak. Doris then showed me a simple printed list of exercises. They looked ridiculously easy. Forget the co-pays and the fancy gym. We're doing this here, in my house, where no one can see. The most important exercise, she said, was the bird dog hold. It increases core stability by a huge amount, Maggie. 93%. Think of it like this. Your core is the cabinet you're built on. If the cabinet is strong, the doors don't swing open when the wind blows. She showed me how to get on all fours and stretch one arm out while stretching the opposite leg out behind me, holding the position steady. 20 minutes, 3 times a week. That's all it takes, Maggie. This is how you prevent those vertebral fractures and keep yourself from falling apart." Then she pointed to the wall. "And this. Wall push-ups with an isometric hold. You press against the wall, hold for a few seconds, then release. It works your upper body strength, which helps you catch yourself if you trip." Doris's instructions included the numbers. She wasn't guessing. She said 8 weeks of those wall push-ups could increase my upper body functional strength by 34%. Bethany had deliberately steered me toward an expensive, useless form of therapy. That ship has sailed for Bethany. She wouldn't get away with this. The hardest part was waiting for the lab results. In the meantime, I started training in secret. I would sneak across the street to Doris's house or wait until Mark and Bethany were gone to use my own wall. The bird dog holds were agony at first. My muscles screamed, my back shook, and I couldn't hold the position for more than 10 seconds. I was so weak from months of poisoning. But I pushed through, fueled by the cold rage that Bethany was trying to steal my future. I started small. 10 seconds. 3 reps. "You live and learn, Maggie." Doris encouraged me. "You're strong. You just need to remember how." After only 2 weeks, I felt a shift. I could stand up from the kitchen table without having to brace myself against the chair for 5 seconds first. The dizziness, since I was skipping the pills, was almost gone. I still pretended to be frail whenever Mark or Bethany were around, dragging my feet, leaning heavily on the counter. Then the email came to Doris, encrypted. The lab results. We sat together at her kitchen table, the silence thick as cream. Doris opened the file and printed it out. The beige powder sold as a fortified protein supplement. D was heavily concentrated with zolpidem, a powerful sedative that causes severe dizziness and confusion, and Flexeril, a potent muscle relaxant. The amount was not immediately lethal, but the sustained low-dose exposure was perfectly calculated to mimic advanced frailty, ensuring I would keep falling and confirming the sarcopenia diagnosis. It kept me cloudy, sleepy, and too weak to fight. I looked at the paper, tracing the chemical names with my finger. It was true. Premeditated. Bethany wasn't just neglectful. She was trying to systematically dismantle my life. I looked at Doris, tears finally stinging my eyes. Tears not of fear, but of profound, aching grief. Mark, my son. He was either completely blind or completely complicit. "I raised him alone, Doris. Scrubbed floors so he could get a fair start," I whispered, the betrayal burning my throat. "And he let this woman do this to me." Doris reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "He's lost, Maggie, caught up in her ambition. But we focus on what we can control now. We focus on proof. The truth was, I wasn't just fighting for my life. I was fighting to save my home, my independence, and my dignity. I couldn't let her win." I dried my eyes. The old cook in me came back, the one who knew how to handle the rush of a busy dinner service. I needed a plan. The next few weeks were a blur of training and surveillance. I continued the secret physical training diligently. I added in seated leg raises, with resistance bands that Doris found for me. Doris claimed these simple exercises could improve my gait speed by 28%. It felt true. My legs were becoming steel rods instead of sandbags. My physical recovery was rapid because I had cut off the poison. But I had to maintain the illusion of frailty for Bethany. I started keeping a log. I bought a little digital blood pressure monitor, the kind that wraps around your wrist. Every day, I measured my pressure and recorded it, especially an hour after a meal or medication from Bethany. One evening, I tried an experiment Doris had told me about. I had heard Bethany talking about how my blood pressure was dangerously high, making me a flight risk for any complex medical procedure. "Maggie," Doris had told me. Some of those old wives' tales are true. Try this. Do what they call body scanning. Just close your eyes and feel your body, starting at your toes, moving up to your head. Just 60 seconds. I tried it when I felt panicked and dizzy after one of Bethany's nutritional bars. My pressure was high, 165/96. I closed my eyes, focused, and scanned my body for 60 seconds. I measured again, 152/88. I was stunned. I did it again the next day. Same result. I'll be darned, I thought. I was controlling my body, something Bethany insisted I couldn't do. I also needed audio evidence. I found my old micro-cassette recorder, a relic from the 90s, in a dusty drawer. It was bulky, but it worked. I hid it in the sleeve of my favorite worn-out cardigan, ready to record any incriminating conversation. Bethany, sensing the clock was running out on her plan, intensified the pressure. "Mom, the hospital called. They want you back for more tests after that last fall," she told me one Tuesday, eyes shining with false concern. "We need to get the deed finalized before any major hospitalization, just in case." Hospitalization? That meant they could isolate me, change my papers, and sell the house before I could even find a phone. I agreed to the testing, but I knew I was running out of time. I needed one final damning piece of evidence that would explain Mark's silence. 2 days later, I got lucky. Mark and Bethany were arguing in the kitchen, thinking I was asleep in my room. I placed the recorder under my door, just touching the carpet. Mark was desperate. "Bethany, I don't feel good about this. She's my mother. She looks so frail." Bethany's voice was pure ice. "Frail is good, Mark. Fragility is currency. You saw the lawyer's bill. We need this house equity now. If you don't sign these papers, we lose the deposit on the new truck. And your mother loses the house anyway, because we won't afford her bills." She was manipulating him with money, making him believe he was making a sacrifice for me, not against me. The next day, she announced the final move. "Mom, the notary public is coming tomorrow morning at 9. Just a quick signature on the quit-claim deed, transferring the house into Mark's name. It's a protection measure, pure paperwork." She didn't sound like she was asking. She sounded like she was telling me my execution time. That evening, Bethany brought me a special dessert, a small, thick glass of what she called high-potency recovery drink. It was beige, but darker this time, and thicker. It smelled faintly medicinal. "You need to drink this down quickly, Mom. It's high in magnesium for your muscles, and we need you rested for tomorrow." I looked at her. Her eyes were triumphant. This was the overdose. Enough sedative to make me utterly compliant, unable to think or argue, maybe even too confused to lift the pen tomorrow, making it easier to forge the signature. I raised the glass, my hand shaking. Not from weakness, but from theatrical effort. I took a huge, choking gulp. Then I acted. I leaned forward, gripping my chest, pretending to gasp. "Oh, Bethany, I feel so dizzy. It's too strong." I let my hand flop, spilling the rest of the thick liquid down my silk pajamas. I slumped back onto the pillow, giving my best imitation of a woman sinking into a drugged sleep. Bethany rushed forward, annoyed at the mess, but satisfied with my condition. She scooped up the glass, wiped the spill with a towel, and checked my pupils. She smiled, cold and sharp. "Just rest, Mom. You'll sign in the morning. It's just a formality." She left, pulling the bedroom door shut and sliding the bolt home. As soon as I heard her footsteps retreat and the sound of the front door closing behind her, I sat up, not slowly, but with the controlled strength of someone who had done 50 wall push-ups that morning. I walked to the bathroom, induced vomiting to get rid of the small amount I had swallowed, and rinsed my mouth. I looked in the mirror. My eyes were clear. The dizziness was gone. The strength was real. It was 34% better in my arms, and my core felt like a steel drum, thanks to the bird dogs. I reached into the pocket of my robe, pulling out the micro-cassette. I had recorded their argument, Mark's complicity, and Bethany's final cruel satisfaction. Tomorrow, 9 o'clock, the notary would come. Bethany thought she was walking into a quick inheritance, signing the death certificate of the last independent thing I had. But she wasn't coming to steal my house. She was coming to walk straight into Maggie Sullivan's kitchen, where the only thing on the menu was justice, and I was standing ready to serve. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story will travel. It was 9 o'clock sharp on Wednesday morning. The air in my small dining room, usually filled with the scent of coffee and old dust, was thick with nervous tension. Bethany sat across the table from me, crisp and professional in a severe gray suit, radiating triumph. Mark was next to her, slouched, biting his lip, clearly miserable but present. The notary public, a timid man named Mr. Hanson, sat at the head of the table shuffling the quit-claim deed that would transfer my home on Oak Street to Mark's name. I was wheeled in by Bethany, draped in my silk robe, my hair purposefully mussed, looking exactly as she had described me over the phone, practically comatose. She placed the document directly in front of me, along with a pen. "Just sign here, Mom," she cooed, her voice sickly sweet, leaning in so only I could hear. One quick scratch, and everything is settled. Then you can go back to rest. I raised the pen, letting my hand tremble violently over the signature line, acting out the last vestiges of the heavily sedated woman she believed I was. My eyes met hers, and I saw the greed, raw, undisguised, hungry, in her sharp gaze. But instead of signing, I gripped the armrests of the chair. With a sudden controlled surge of power, fueled by weeks of wall push-ups, I pushed myself up and out of the wheelchair. The chair rolled back with a slight squeak, and the heavy wool blankets I was wrapped in fell to the floor in a dramatic heap. I stood there, firm and straight, on my own 2 feet. The transformation was absolute. I was still 71, but the weakness, the terrible dizziness, the collapse of my limbs, it was all gone. My core, strengthened by Doris's bird dog holds, felt like a steel column. Mark gasped, a sound torn from his throat. Bethany didn't gasp. She froze, her smile dissolving into pure, unadulterated shock. The front door, which Bethany thought she had locked, opened with quiet efficiency. Detective Reynolds of the Des Moines Police Department entered first, followed by Doris Henderson, her face grim and determined, and Dr. Stern, a certified geriatric medicine specialist Doris had contacted. "What is the meaning of this, Maggie?" Bethany stammered, scrambling to cover the deed papers. "You've gone completely delusional. You need to be admitted right now." I walked, not with the dragging shuffle of a frail woman, but with a deliberate, firm stride, rounding the table until I stood directly opposite her. The dizziness she had depended on was a ghost of the past. "I haven't gone mad, Bethany," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the terror I'd endured. "I just stopped taking your medicine." I placed the small, heavy micro-cassette recorder on the polished wood. It looked absurdly old-fashioned next to the legal documents, but its testimony was modern enough. I pressed play. Bethany's cold voice filled the silent room, slightly tinny but perfectly clear. Frail is good, Mark. Fragility is currency. We need this house equity now. If you don't sign these papers, we lose the deposit on the new truck and your mother loses the house anyway, because we won't afford her bills. Mark buried his face in his hands. Mr. Hanson, the notary, looked at Bethany as if she were a snake shedding its skin. I continued the presentation, opening a manila folder and sliding the lab analysis onto the table next to the recorder. This is the analysis of the fortified protein smoothie you insisted upon, I explained, tapping the paper. It wasn't protein. It was a cocktail of heavy sedatives, zolpidem, and a powerful muscle relaxant, Flexeril, calculated to mimic advanced sarcopenia, ensuring my falls continued and making me compliant enough to sign away the house you wanted. Dr. Stern, the specialist, interjected calmly. The patient's prior physical therapy regimen was deliberately ineffective. The stretching focused on useless movements, costing $30 per session, while avoiding the functional exercises proven to build strength. Mrs. Sullivan's symptoms were manufactured, not natural frailty. Mark finally looked up, his eyes red and wet, confused and terrified. Bethany, defeated but still fighting, launched her final desperate attack, gripping Mark's hand. Mark, look at me. I am your wife. You're going to let your mother send your wife to prison over an old house? Bethany screamed, her perfect composure finally cracking. We needed this house, Mom. I loved you. We just needed the money. I looked directly at my son, Mark, who was still silently weeping, completely paralyzed. I had raised him alone, scrubbing pots and pans until my knuckles bled, just so he could have a better life. I spoke, my voice low and gelid, without a single tremor of sadness or regret. I scrubbed those floors for 40 years, paying off this house, so that no one could ever take my freedom. You two planned my slow medicated death with sedatives to steal the $350,000 of equity. You left this family the day you looked at me and calculated how soon you could sell the roof over my head. I don't know who you are anymore. I slid a sealed envelope toward Mark. Those are the divorce papers, already filed, and a restraining order. You are merely her accomplice, and neither of you has a place here. Detective Reynolds moved swiftly. He clicked the cold steel handcuffs onto Bethany's wrists. Bethany Sullivan, you are under arrest for attempted manslaughter, assault with a deadly substance, and medical fraud. Bethany began screaming protests, denying everything, accusing me of mental illness. But her words lost all power as she was escorted out of my dining room. Her pristine suit now rumpled, her image shattered. Mark sat motionless, ruined, watching his entire future vanish through my front door. Mr. Hanson, the notary, quickly stamped the quitclaim deed with a large red void and hurried away, relieved to escape the scene of the crime. The silence that settled over the house after the police cars left was deep and peaceful, the first true silence I had known in months. The justice was swift and devastating. Bethany was convicted of felony attempted manslaughter, gross medical malpractice, and elder fraud, receiving a 7-year sentence in a state penitentiary. Her registered nurse license was immediately and permanently revoked, and the court imposed $200,000 in restitution and punitive damages to cover my legal and medical costs, as well as the emotional suffering she caused. Mark faced a complete collapse. Though he was not charged criminally, his moral cowardice and complicity in the scheme destroyed him. The divorce left him isolated and financially stripped. He lost his job at the hardware store and moved out of state, carrying the indelible shame of enabling his mother's murder for financial gain. The rest of our family, my cousins and nephews, publicly repudiated him. Bethany serves her time in the women's facility in Mitchellville, receiving no family visits. Her desperate ambition to secure wealth resulted in her losing her freedom, her marriage, and her professional identity forever. The greatest triumph, however, was my recovery. 1 year after the confrontation, at 72 years old, I am unrecognizable from the frail woman who was falling on the linoleum. I wake every morning before the sun, not with dread, but with vigor. My gait speed, which Doris had measured, improved by 28% thanks to the resistance band exercises. The wall push-ups did exactly what she promised, increasing my upper body functional strength by 34%, allowing me to lift and move heavy objects without strain. Most importantly, the core stability gained from the bird dog holds reached a solid 93%, eliminating the risk of falling. I proudly tossed away the walker and all the expensive prescriptions Bethany had insisted on. My physical health is now superior to patients 20 years my junior. I used the $200,000 in restitution and my fully paid-off bungalow to establish the Maggie Sullivan Functional Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to teaching low-income seniors the suppressed, effective functional fitness protocols. It's not a shiny corporate structure. It's just the community center, run by old women who know how to stand up for themselves. Doris is my chief operating officer, of course, keeping our schedule organized like a perfect Dewey Decimal System. We lead workshops 3 times a week, serving hundreds of local seniors. We teach them the wall push-ups and the bird dog holds, simple movements that restore balance and power. When I show them the evidence, the printed study showing 93% core stability increase, they listen. When I tell them that I was slowly poisoned by my own family for $350,000, they understand. They are the strong and stable crew, and together we monitor signs of elder abuse and medical neglect in the area. I have found a profound, late-life purpose in fighting for the independence of others. I cook again, not for a living, but for pleasure, sharing hearty, non-poisoned meals with the volunteers. I selectively reconnected with the distant nephews and nieces who supported me, focusing on bonds forged by loyalty, not just blood. Sometimes when I am standing by the wall, demonstrating a push-up with perfect form to a group of laughing seniors, I remember the feeling of the cold linoleum on my cheek, the shame, the helplessness. Bethany wanted me dead, and this house sold before my 72nd birthday to fund her selfish life. Instead, at 72, I used her greed to fund a foundation, and the house she tried to steal became the headquarters where I teach others how to stand up for themselves. She tried to bury me with muscle relaxants. I unearthed myself with core strength. The house she tried to steal became the place where I finally learned how to stand. And if you stayed with me until the end, leave a comment letting me know what you thought of the story and what kinds of stories you'd like to read more of. Thank you so much for being here. See you in the next emotional story.